Okay, welcome to the Jam with Crash and Church. I'm Church.
I'm Crash.
And my buddy there's Crash. We wanted to talk today about what it means to be a man, a manly man.
Manly men, yes. Just like in Robin Hood Men in Tights. We're manly men.
There's trends going around that I wanted to talk about, and that's the reason I wanted to bring it up with you is because there's two trends that specifically there's the pro man and the anti man. The obvious one's the anti man trend. That you have this toxic masculinity idea where masculinity is toxic and the things about masculinity are toxic and being masculine in any regard is toxic.
Yeah.
Along with that is also just the sort of the what would you call it? Just the deviling or no, it's not the right word, but the demonizing.
That's the emasculinization of men.
Well, just the demonizing of men. You know, like being a white male is now sort of the lowest rung on the totem pole as far as, you know, being considered of value. And so being, you know, obviously being white males, we take personal offense at that.
Well, I think too, you know, you talk about toxic masculinity, but that was a term that was derived from feminist groups and far left-wing groups in order to bring down the white man.
All right.
So,
yeah, and it's not just white men for that. I mean, yes, that is the primary thing.
It's really to vilify men.
Yeah, it's just to vilify men in general. I mean, even black men or Asian men or anything, you know, any men that act manly or have manly traits. It's a response also to the Me Too movement. It's a response to, you know, what they call rape culture and those sorts of things, some of which is valid. You know, some of that criticism is valid, which is kind of why I wanted to talk about it, because I think that what we're seeing a response to that. I don't know how familiar you are with this stuff, because I know you don't follow all the same sources that I do, but I've seen a lot of articles on various, specifically on a guy named Andrew Tate right now. He's kind of making the rounds in the news. But I've seen in the past, there's been other groups like this. One name I'm familiar with, for example, is Jack Murphy. There's two guys that are, I think, twins that do it as well. And what they are is they're part of what I think the term I heard is called the manosphere. And then you also get like Jordan Peterson, who kind of fits into the same sort of thing, where there are these commentators and influencers, if you will, who teach men how to be men, and that's the point of why they, you know, of their commentary, and they talk about masculinity and they push masculinity and they push for manly men again. And it's really interesting because as I listen to some of the things that they say, Andrew Tate in particular is an interesting case because he's kind of a scumbag in a lot of ways, but he's also at the same time right in a lot of ways. And so he pushes masculinity and he pushes, you know, being a man, but then he kind of misses the boat, I feel, which is why where it moves into kind of being a scumbag is he becomes chauvinistic and he becomes very just derogatory about the way he talks about women even. And just like the way that he talks about being a man and these trends that you see, that they start focusing on the things that are you know, the physical, you know, testosterone and grunting and, you know, the Tim Allen in Home Improvement.
So when Tim Allen did it, it was funny.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's their idea of what it means to be a man, is we need to bring back, you know, the beer swigging, you know, watching football.
Whoa, you know, don't knock that. Don't knock watching football.
No, I'm not knocking it. I'm saying that's what they're talking about, though. They're talking about these things that they are suggesting as masculinity that are superficial.
So instead of hanging out in a coffee shop at Starbucks or playing video games and stuff, it's like bring back manly things.
Right. Exactly. And that's part of it. But the part that I think is worse is the way that they talk about men's relationship and how they ought to have relationships with women. And so particularly like one of the clips that I saw recently, and I didn't watch Andrew Tate directly. I think I watched it on one of the Daily Wire commentators was talking about, actually a couple of them have talked about it. And so they showed clips of Andrew Tate. And so one of the things he said that if a woman is doing OnlyFans that he's dating, so it's, his girl, if she's doing OnlyFans, then she owes him 80% of the take. And so that was his attitude, because his relationship is that he owns her. Well, he actually was careful to not say it in terms of ownership.
Is he going to hit her over the head with a club and drag her back to his cave?
With a club, yeah. Well, and the idea, yeah, he was trying to distinguish the difference between ownership, like property, versus like belonging to. And so I don't know that he got his point across, but I kind of got what he was trying to say in that regard, is that she belongs to me. And so if she's going to go and share her bits with other people, then I deserve a part of that take, sort of thing. And just the whole idea of that, like right from the get-go, is totally messed up.
That's male chauvinism.
Like how can you even talk about being manly when you're talking about even the willingness to date a girl who's doing OnlyFans? Like that shouldn't even be on the table. It shouldn't be part of the equation at all. Like, do you respect her? Do you respect yourself? Where's your honor, man? And that's what I think when we talk about being a man, that's what it comes down to. It's not about whether you're watching football or not, right? Like, sure, those manly things play a role, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But I want to talk about what are the important parts of being a man. And I think you and I will have a lot to say about it, because we're both fathers of boys.
Yep.
And we've both worked in organizations that deal with boys. You were involved in scouting for a long time. I was involved in scouting for a while. I was a scout, when I'm an Eagle Scout. I did scouting, credit to my dad, not to myself for that. My dad pushed me through that. But so we have a lot of interaction. And then in our church also, we feel it's important to mentor, these boys in a way. And I just received an assignment to work with the 10 and 11-year-old boys, for example, in the church, to just to do activities with them, twice a month sort of thing. So it's not a really in-depth calling, and it's not like I'm going to be preaching to them or something like that. But just like, it's been on my mind, what does it mean to be a man, and how can I set an example that will actually be beneficial to these men, so that they do? Because I think that legitimately, there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. It's just not all masculinity is toxic, right? Which is the way that it's used.
I think the term toxic masculinity, again, a term derived from feminism and the left, but I think that they've turned the male chauvinism, which is kind of what you were describing about a guy who is feeling like he deserves 80% of his woman's take. Because he owns her, or that's his woman, and that's the toxic masculinity. That's a guy who treats women poorly. It's a guy who beats children, who beats women, who feels like they are dominant over everybody.
Well, and not that we're clear, we're not accusing Andrew Tate specifically of beating women or something like that.
No, but see,
but just that mentality leads to that sort of thing.
It's that power struggle. It's that drive to have power or dominion over other people. And with men, look, to be a real man, that's not what it is. You and I had a conversation a few days ago, yesterday actually, because there is a discussion about what it is to be a real man, and when you get that from people that don't know what it's like to be a man, it's really tough to remain quiet, but I do, and I think that's really what a real man does. A real man will choose his battles wisely. A real man will stand up for what is right when it's necessary. A real man will come
Right.
in to the defense of other people when it's necessary. Again, when it's necessary, not because he's a hothead, not because he has to have a temper, not because he's quick to judge, quick to throw fists. A real man is very thoughtful about the way he approaches things, but he's also he's kind to people. There was I want to say it was Roy Rogers, who had a code called the Cowboy Code, and it kind of goes like this: a cowboy never shoots first. He never takes unfair advantage. He never treats women poorly. He never treats animals poorly. He's kind, but of course he's strong, and that was the whole mystique of being a cowboy back in the 40s and 50s.
Right.
Was this? These were the men. These were the guys that would protect their women, but were also not. They're not bad people. So.
But even then, when I think about that, there's a cultural idea of what it means to be a man, and a cowboy's a good example of that, right? Roping, hard riding,
Hardworking,
shooting when you need to.
but hard.
Yeah,
It's hardworking. Yeah.
Right. But the thing is that I think even that we can have some confusion on that if we typecast all men as needing to be that. Because there are men who are, just by their nature, and they have no control over it, they're not strong. They're not capable in certain regards. They're not particularly masculine as far as muscle mass or something like that. Like, men come in all type. Does that mean those men can't be as manly? And that kind of is what I think the question needs to come down to. Jordan Peterson has a take where he talks about, and I didn't watch the whole thing of this one, but I saw part of it, where Jordan Peterson talked about how men should be inherently, that it's good that they have violence in them, I think is the way he put it, but then that they control that violence, but that they have the capability to that violence is a good thing. And I don't know, maybe he talked about further detailing that out, and so I'm not necessarily saying what he said was wrong, but my take on that is that is a response, that's a sociological response to society at large, to say that men having the potential for violence is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And that is because you have situations where you need to protect society, you need to protect family, you need to protect country, and you need to fight. You need to protect yourself against the wolves. You need to go wrestle with the grizzly bear, sort of thing. The fact that men in general have the ability to do that is good by and large. But to imply then that if a man doesn't then have the potential for violence in him, or that doesn't have the ability to go out and wrestle with the grizzly bear, that he's somehow less of a man, then we start running into problems, because not all men are capable of wrestling with grizzly bears. You could take an extreme example just to make it easy to understand.
Hold on.
Someone who's disabled, for example.
Let's really clarify this. No man is capable of wrestling a grizzly bear.
Okay. No, hopefully that was clear.
No man. You said not all men. No. All men are incapable of wrestling a grizzly bear.
But the point being that if you take a man who is, as an example, as an extreme example, someone who's severely disabled and I mean physically disabled, right? Who is just simply incapable of going out and shooting a gun and
doing
running off
manly
the wolves
things,
or whatever.
doing manly things,
and doing those quote unquote manly things. Can that person, because since we're talking about whether he's a man or not, I won't call him a man until we establish it. Can that person be a man and a manly man? And the argument, of course, that I have is yes, of course. Yep. Of course that person can. Being able to do the manly things is not what makes a man a man. So that leads to the question, what does? So what's your take on that?
What's my take on what is a manly man?
Well, what is it that is actually the attributes of manhood that matter, that all men, regardless of whether you're disabled, regardless of whether you're short, tall, overweight, can grow a good beard or not, Like, regardless of the physical manly attributes, whether you like football or not, what are the attributes that are important that all men should strive for and
So
should
I
achieve,
think,
should be working to
yeah,
achieve?
I think, so we touched on a few of them already. A man
Right.
is protective, and I think that's where I think what my personal take, just knowing who Jordan Peterson is and what he would stand for, I think that probably his point is men have the testosterone levels necessary to become violent when it's necessary. In other words, if they are in a
Typically, yeah.
situation where they have to defend, where they have to be protective, and men are inherently protective. So a man who stands up for his children, a man who stands up for his wife, a man who stands up for others who are weaker than he is, somebody who does something like that would be considered, in my opinion, manly. Every single firefighter and police officer who ran towards the Twin Towers in New York City on 9/11 while everybody else was running away were men. Those were manly men. Those were men who did a duty because they felt in their hearts that it was upon them in order to do it, even when the buildings came crashing down.
Right.
So I
But
very noble things that Jordan Peterson also talked about one time. The absolute necessity for men in society. If we don't have men, our society, our civilization collapses. And what he talked about,
yeah.
or the examples that he brought up, were the men who laid down the infrastructure, the men who laid down the roads, the electricity, the plumbing, the bridges, the buildings, all of these things that men inherently do, that inherently and historically men do. They are the ones that create the buildings. They are the ones that create our structures. They build our schools. They build our hospitals. They build our homes. They build our roads. All of these things exist because of men. And without
Right.
men, our civilization literally collapses. It doesn't exist. So this idea of
And you're talking, I mean, obviously, when you talk in the terms of sexual reproduction, that's true, but you're talking even outside that scope.
No, I'm talking about our civilization. What makes civilization civilization? It's our technology. It's our construction, our buildings. These are the things that make our civilization. It's what makes us civil. So when you
Right.
have science that helps us further ourselves, those that the equipment, the technology that exists because of men. It exists because men work in factories to create the machines that are used in the hospitals. They are the things that put us above our predecessors in history, in that we now have an expansive intellect. We are capable of so much more. We put telescopes into space that can see hundreds of billions of light years away. I think now we are seeing so far into space that we're talking trillions now of light years away from us. And those were things that were done because of the scientific minds, but the men specifically who built those structures. I know a few of them. I was one of them that helped with some of the things on the James Webb Space Telescope. I had students working on parts that were used on the James Webb Space Telescope, and these were men. And there is, again, this inherent capability of men, this inherent I want to say psyche, but also the physical aspect of it to be able to do the physical labor that is necessary to create these types of structures. You might have, I think by and large, most engineers are men. I don't think that's disputable, but I think that there are definitely some female scientists who would have contributed to those things. But by and large, they are mostly men who do it. So I consider those
Right.
types of
And
things
that's,
manly things.
and I do, but and I agree with you. So don't take this as if I'm totally just trying to counter what you're saying. I'm just trying to expand the conversation. Everything that you've talked about, you're right that has been men that have done that. But I don't think that anything that you've said is something that women can't do or couldn't have done if men weren't available. And we've seen examples of that, World War II being a
If
prime
men weren't
example, where
available, there
women,
wouldn't be any women to do it.
well, sure. But the point is, in World War II, women had to step up and take the factory jobs, and they had to go in and do that work.
Yeah.
So women are capable of doing those things in need.
Absolutely.
And so saying that that's the defining characteristic of men, I think, it's definitely something that men, it's an attribute that men have, and it's a natural tendency that men have. But I'm not sure it's the defining characteristic that absolutely should be, well, I take that back. It actually should be what men do. I just don't know that is a defining characteristic
it should be
of what makes a man a man.
It should be a stereotype, in my opinion. It should be a stereotype that a man does those types of things. But that doesn't mean that a man who is incapable of doing those types of things still cannot be very manly. So a man is somebody who is responsible, somebody who takes it upon himself without the expectation of reward or even recognition to do the things that are necessary to take care of not only himself responsibly, but also to take care of others responsibly, whether they are family members, whether they're those in the community. That, in my opinion, is something that a man inherently should be capable and should do, again, without the expectation of recognition or reward.
It just strikes me that what you're talking about tends to be more of a societal problem than a problem with just men, because we see those same problems with women. For example, not stepping up and taking responsibility, not showing honor, not being honest. When I think about masculinity, when I first thought about it, I thought of it in terms of, a man has honor, integrity, loyalty, works hard, protects, all these sorts of things that you're saying. But then as I was thinking about it, I was like, well, that's also what I define as a woman, as important for women.
But without men, let's talk about that. But without men, do those things occur? And I think what the point is, maybe we're both going in the same direction, is that because men are not standing up, because they are not being responsible, because they are not defending, because they are not teaching their children, because they're not having children and then teaching them properly. Because of that, both boys and girls that are being raised, because of that, that is why we are seeing this downfall in society.
Yeah, and I think so. What I came to with it is I thought, okay, so what is the difference between men and women? If men and women, like you say, okay, the core characteristic, and I'm not saying this is, but just an example. If you say the core characteristic of being a man is honor, or something like that, and then you say, well, wait a minute, that's also what women need to have. Women should be just as honorable, And so you say, okay, well, what's the difference then between men and women at that level? And so I just don't think you can get away or you can escape the reality of roles. And I think that's what it comes down to, really, because women can do most things that men can do, not necessarily competitively with men, right? Sure. Like they may not be able to run as fast or lift as strong, but they could still, they could do all the hard work. It might be harder for them to do, but they could do the hard work. They could fight the battles. A woman can pick up a sword and swing it at someone. They could pull a trigger and shoot a gun, right? They're capable of the same things men are. Yeah. So I don't think that you can escape the importance and the necessity of roles. And I think that's where it really comes down to. And now the physical difference and the emotional, when you get back to like the Jordan Peterson idea of that inherent violence, right? That men have, the testosterone sort of drive and boyish thing. My son it's so funny because they talk about these things being cultural a lot of times, like boys are just taught masculinity. And when you have a boy and a daughter, you have a son and a daughter, you learn real quickly that is not true. And I know that's not going to be exclusively, that not all boys are going to be the same and not all girls are going to be the same, but the natural and obvious difference between my son and my daughter in the way that my son is just, for lack of a better term, violent. He just is. And he's been that way since the beginning.
So he's a boy. He's a boy.
He's a boy, yeah. He's a grunter. He's a yeller. He's a jumper. He's a climber. He's a, and girls do that too, but it's not the same. He's just like,
but he loves I know cars, once again, he loves trucks. He loves,
right.
Yeah.
And my daughter does too, but it's, once again, it's not the same. Like there's just an obvious difference, and it's funny. It's just funny to see how he's just so boy, and stuff.
But
And
your daughter also loves to dress up. She loves to be a girl. She loves to wear girly things.
she loves dressing my son up too, which is
that's because
he comes out wearing a princess dress that she put him in.
He's her doll. He is her doll.
Yeah, exactly. And he doesn't mind. He's only 2, so he's like,
yeah. Eventually, he'll mind.
So,
yeah. He's like, no, hey, I'm 11. I'm done with this.
Right. Assuming his parents don't encourage it, which we won't.
No,
so.
and then assuming that he doesn't go, ooh, look at me.
Right. And so I think what you have is and you see in my daughter, the other day she said to my wife, and I'm not sure what the context is there. My wife reported it, but she said to my wife that when she grew up, what she wanted to be was a mommy, and of course melted my wife's heart and melted my daddy heart too and stuff. That when I grow up, I want to be a mommy. That's what I it was funnier than that the way she said it, but I can't remember it. Something like that's what she wanted for her job or something. And she's always had that sort of nurturing, where she just naturally is drawn to dolls. My son's drawn to dolls too, the same dolls as my daughter. He'll come out carrying one of my daughter's dolls. But it's different. Like he's not nurturing to it. He's, using it as a bat or something like that. And so there's just kind of a natural difference there where she's just naturally more nurturing and he's naturally more, like I said, violent. And so I think that as a general, across the board that men naturally have a tendency towards things that's why the roles end up mattering because And it's in today's society, some of those roles can be blurred, and they are, and I think that's okay. When you lived, 200, 300 years ago, by necessity, the men had to go out and do the fighting. They had to go out and shoot the wolf when it was out prowling. They had to go out and do the farming. They had to go out and do the hunting and those things. And the wife, by necessity, had to stay at home.
Well, they had to do that up until
children.
The Vietnam War, or after the Vietnam War. It wasn't until after the Vietnam War that women started becoming more prevalent, and of course now they're in combative roles.
Well, technology is what makes technology makes the difference because when you throw technology into the mix, women become equal. Like you talk about building now. Like if you're building a bridge, how heavy you can lift becomes irrelevant. It's whether you can drive the backhoe or whatever. It's like whether you can operate the crane. Like those things become less important when technology gets in the way. If we're all wearing Iron Man suits, we're all equal, right? And
yeah, we're not going to bring up the girl power scene in Infinity War or Endgame.
The technology of things like, well, first of all, birth control. Birth control changed everything about the roles of men and women, but then also just the technology of things like formula. Like before formula. Yeah. Women had to stay home with their babies because they had to breastfeed them. That was the only way they could. You're out pioneering in the West somewhere, and you have a baby. The only way that baby's really eaten, and the whole family's
only
barely surviving.
Only one way.
There's only one way, right? And so there was just a necessity for those roles, and those necessities have been taken away by technology in a lot of ways. But that doesn't mean that there still isn't inherently within us those natures. And so I think that, therefore, when you talk about protection, right, it's like if you got into a situation with your family where your family was under threat, right, should the man go and cuddle the children while the woman goes out and confronts the threat? Or should the man go out and confront the threat while the woman stays and cuddles the children?
That's what we're being taught now, but the answer is emphatically no, but that is exactly what we are being taught.
Well, which one?
The
man should go out.
We are being taught that it is the woman who does the fighting, and we've been talking about this on our other episodes, of course, and that's our reviews of the Rings of Girl Power. And that it's the women who are doing all of the big fighting, the women who are leading the armies, the women who are leading all of these things, and this is what we're seeing. This is feminism. This is exactly what's been happening since the 1960s and 70s. Was that women not only can do things that men can do, now it's so much to the point where men are stupid, bumbling idiots and it's been leading up to this for a long time. It used to be that in comedy shows, sitcoms like The King of Queens or Everybody Loves Raymond, what those two shows have in common, and this goes back for many years actually, is that in those types of shows, it was considered comedic when you had an overweight or all otherwise rather bumbling idiot fool of a husband or father and father,
Right.
and
And it was
and the
comedic. It was funny.
and the
Yeah.
mother, well, yeah, the mother was the smart one. She was the responsible
Right.
one. She was
The
the,
Simpsons
yes,
being the
exactly. But that's exactly what it was in The King of Queens and Everybody Loves Raymond. Now, don't get me wrong; they're funny as all get out because the comedy was so good, and they were written by the male characters, and that's what made them.
and
Yeah,
acted well and
exactly. It's
stuff.
what it's
Yeah.
partially what made them funny. That was partially why Home Improvement was so popular. Here, Tim Allen brought his comedy, and he talked about the fact that men can be bumbling fools, but it's their pride thinking that they're not bumbling fools that makes it funny.
Right. But when push came to shove,
No.
I can't speak to all those because I haven't watched them all, but when push came to shove, if Homer had to go out and protect his family, he did
He
it.
was the one who would do it. Yep.
Yep. And same thing with the other one you just mentioned that I just
Home
spaced,
Improvement?
of course, because thank
Yeah,
you.
Tim Allen. Yeah.
Yeah, Tim Allen, when it came to when the moment came where he had to do what was right, he stepped up
Yeah.
and he did it because he was the man,
Yeah.
and the man steps up and does it. And once again, though, women step up and do it too. If you go back to the situation where you had the a life-threatening situation, well, what if the husband's not there? Then the woman stands up and she does it,
But
right?
whose responsibility? Yeah, but then whose responsibility is it to make sure that the woman is capable of taking care of herself? And it's the man. The man should be the one teaching. Now, of course, there are situations where women could be a single mother. They are a single parent and the father isn't around. So in those situations, of course, you want the woman to be able to defend herself.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
that the man is required for her to learn those things,
No.
or like she
No.
can't learn them without the man. But yeah, so what you're talking about is a responsibility thing. Once again, a role where it goes back to that role thing that I think is kind of key.
I think another thing too about what it is to be a man is to be also somebody who's humble, somebody who does not expect to be always recognized or gloat about his accomplishments. We live in a really selfish me generation.
Narcissistic.
It's very narcissistic. So there's so many people that post things on social media. Look at me, look what I'm doing. Look at how much fun I'm having on my vacation. Look at this wonderful scenery that's out here.
It's all the Kardashians' fault.
Oh my gosh. So I think
Candace Owens
we
proposed that
Oh,
idea.
well,
It's the Kardashians' fault.
I don't know about that, but I mean we definitely give attention to people, and it just creates this situation where now everybody wants a piece of the pie, and we're seeing less and less focus on other people. We're seeing so much focus on the self and self-fulfillment. And what we're finding, though, is that depression levels are at all-time highs. We're seeing
course.
suicide levels at very, very probably, I would dare say, at all-time highs. I would say that we are seeing alcohol abuse. We're seeing drug abuse at all-time levels. We're seeing all of these things to try to mitigate the loneliness that people are feeling because they're searching after those very selfish
Because when you turn
things.
when you turn to selfishness, turn inside to yourself, you'll
You're
never
not
find fulfillment.
happy.
It actually
yeah.
it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the whole Andrew Tate idea that a woman would owe him 80%. And I think to myself, in the relationship, the way that a man and woman's relationship should work is, first of all, if you're not married, you don't get anything from her, and you shouldn't get anything from her. You're not married. And if you are married, then it's 100%. But it goes both ways. The man's and the woman are one. and what they have is one, and what they share is one, and it should be one because they become one. And so the idea that the woman owes the man, and going back to the more recent topic, though, how that ties in, is that that is not coercive. It's not that you owe me 100%. It's that I give you 100%. And that's the way that relationships should work. Now, they never do work that way perfectly, obviously. But in an ideal, perfect relationship, the woman would give herself entirely 100% to the man, and the man would give himself 100% entirely to the woman. And then you'd have a perfect marriage. And it doesn't ever happen, of course, because we are selfish creatures. We're naturally, inclined to have our feelings hurt, have our pride hurt, different things like that and stuff. And so we end up with, even in a really good marriage, you're going to have conflict and stuff. But solution to those conflicts and dealing with any time we have a conflict, the answer and the solution is always to humble yourself. Like, it's always to humble yourself, because it's always about pride, right?
Well, you have to, in order to understand the other person's point of view. And I think that in those types of situations, it's really, I think in marriage especially, and relationship really with anybody, is it really comes down to effort. Are you willing to put in the effort? Are you humble enough to put in the necessary effort, instead of just standing in your corner and deciding I'm right, you're wrong, and that's the way it's going to be.
Prioritize the other person.
Well, but if men would understand this simple truth, you're never right. Even when you are never.
I don't buy that.
No. It's a joke. Even when you are, when you are right, you're
okay,
never right.
Fair, sorry.
But no, I think that what you're saying is
the kind of joke that offends you, right? It's in reality,
it does. But you have this this reality, though, that if you do put 100% effort, it doesn't mean that your marriage is going to be perfect, but it means that your chance of and your rate of success is going to be so much better when both put in 100% effort. Of course, there are going to be times when you get your feelings hurt and you're just going to be extremely upset. And yes, there are times when whether you're a man or whether you're a woman, you stand your ground and you say, no, this is not right, or this is how I feel, and I'm not going to back down just because your feelings are hurt or you're mad because I'm upset. I think that is...
So you can handle that. Obviously, the way you handle it matters as well. But yeah.
Obviously, but I think that, of course, you don't, you're not going to, you don't resort to name calling, don't resort to violence of any kind.
Here's the line. No further. I can't remember the quote. Picard.
So I think that if you have that effort, and I think that's really the big distinction, is when you both put in that effort, then it becomes just a great marriage. So about my friend who just lost his son in a crash, an off-road race, and it's been absolutely devastating to not just my friend who's his father, but to everyone in his family, but to his name was CJ, but to CJ's wife, because they were 100% best friends and they were 100% devoted to one another. They supported each other 100%. It was not he supported everything she did, she kind of supported him. And then because it was 100% both ways, and the amount of work that he put in, the effort that he put in to making sure that they had, as a family, everything that they needed, a home. Financially, she's well taken care of right now. But these were all things that he made sure would be taken care of, but there were also the returns that he got. They were extremely happy. They were extremely happy with one another in their relationship, everything about one another, because they were 100% devoted to each other, and they both gave 100% effort towards each other and making sure that it would work. So that was just a very, very successful marriage. And it's a model for really how how a really good example of what people should do. Unfortunately, we live in a society now where the masses are being taught, especially women, that in order to be happy, they have to be independent. That means in being independent of all men. Who was it? It was
Yeah, it's terrible, terrible
yeah,
philosophy.
yeah, yeah. Who? I apologize. This is totally escaping me right now. And as soon as you say the name, I'm going to know it. But who was the one who played Rachel on Friends?
Jennifer
Jennifer.
Aniston.
I knew it was a Jennifer, but okay. So Jennifer Aniston, she adopted a child, or no, I take that back. She had a child. Um, uh, she had a child naturally, but it was, I believe, it was artificial insemination, if I'm not mistaken. But she had this child, and
Okay.
her comment after the baby was born was, "I don't need a man to raise a child." That statement right there is fundamentally false.
Well, it's fundamentally true, but it's
It's
fundamentally
it's
wrong.
fundamentally true. Yes, of course you can raise a child. It's fundamentally wrong in that
It's just like the Andrew Tate
she
thing
is incapable
comment.
of doing things that a man can teach a child. She just is. Now she can, of course, if
Well,
she
it's
wanted,
answering the wrong question.
she could teach a kid how to catch a ball. That's not what it means to raise a son. It means if you are going to teach your child, a son, how to be a real man, 90% of the time, maybe more, it's going to take the experiences of a man to teach those things, a humble man to teach those things, knowing what is right and what is wrong, knowing when to pick your child up and think instead of react emotionally. Um,
I think it's useful in that regard for sure. But like I said, my approach is just simply that it's answering the wrong question. Why is that question even being asked? I mean, it's obviously not actually being asked, but they're answering it as if it's being asked. And it goes
no,
back to
it
the
wasn't.
same thing as
She
the
wasn't asked a question. Her
right,
comment
but
was
it's
just
like she was asked the question, can you raise this child on your own? Yes, of course I can. Why are you even answering that question? It's the wrong question to answer in the first place. It's like it goes back to that Andrew Tate thing where he's saying where the question is, should a woman who does OnlyFans give 80% to her man? And that's the question being answered. It's like, why is that question even being asked? What a ridiculous situation to be in, or even to consider, because you shouldn't even be in that situation. So yeah, it's asking the wrong question when you're talking about, uh, you know, should my woman owe me money if I'm, if she's doing OnlyFans? It's the same thing as should uh, when Jennifer Aniston says, you know, I can raise, my child without a man. She's asking this question where excuse me, she's
she's
answering.
asserting a question. She's
She's
asserting that there
asserting.
was a
Yeah,
yeah.
she's inferring a question that the question is, can you do this without a man? And that shouldn't be the question that's being asked. The question that should be asked is not, can you raise a son without a man, but should you raise a son without a man? And so it's the same thing. It's like, does a woman owe you money if she's doing OnlyFans? Well, should a woman even be doing OnlyFans? Should you be in a relationship with someone who's going to be
Right.
doing that? It's basically being unfaithful to you at a certain level. Would you stay in that relationship? Would you stay in a relationship with someone who was sharing their, private bits on the internet with the world?
Well, this is also assuming that a woman has the option of raising their child with a man. Not like a situation where maybe they're a widow
Yeah, and that's
or.
that's always the question. That when you talk about the ideal, you find that thing
But
a lot in any sort of family ideal. When you talk about family ideal, you always have the but. What about single women, or what about a situation where this, or what about this, or what about this? You see the same question in like
well, even
abortion.
in that kind of a situation, a woman still has the option of making sure that there is a male influence in that child's life, whether
Right.
it's her father, whether it's her father-in-law,
Right.
whether it's a brother or an uncle or something like that, somebody who is going to be able to have a strong male influence on the child's life. And to your other point about the OnlyFans thing, I think it's there's a big distinction that is kind of being clouded these days, and that is we just allow our spouses or our significant others to just live their lives, and we're supposed to accept it. We're supposed to accept their lifestyle. We're supposed to expect or accept that they do OnlyFans, and we're not supposed to get in the way of that. We're supposed to expect that that we cannot allow our expectations to get in the way of their life. And when I say expectations, I mean a moral standard. We can't allow we're being told that we can't allow our moral standard to be in the way of
even our
whatever
spouses,
somebody wants
which
to
is
live. It's
ridiculous.
my life, you know.
Because when it comes to,
Right,
obviously we
yes,
don't believe
completely.
we don't believe in coercion, we don't believe in force, we don't believe in domination, but we do believe absolutely that you can influence through patience and long suffering and those sorts of things. And then moreover, there are standards that we set for relationships that are, line crossing. They're deal breakers, so to speak. And I would think, someone's spouse going out and, essentially doing pornography or being unfaithful in other regards should be generally considered a deal breaker. That's not appropriate. And it shouldn't even be the root of the core question, just like with Jennifer Aniston, the root of the core question behind it, that is, can you raise a man? Can you live independently, right? Can you be independent? Are you an independent woman? Right? And it's like, that's
Yeah.
like, what is independence? Like
But
independence.
that's the argument. That is the argument. Where we have to raise these strong, independent women, and unfortunately, the real thing behind being a strong, independent woman is, I don't need a man.
Right.
And it's patently false. It's patently false.
And the exceptions to the rules don't change the rule. That's kind of the thing. It's like, so you raised your son primarily without a mother in the home. That is not the ideal, right? Ideally, there should be a husband and a wife. It's the best for children.
Okay, so during the last 5 years, yes. So and this was a situation where I had a wife who had pretty colorful lifestyle choices.
It's a nice way to say it.
Yeah. So I
some problems there. Yeah.
Yeah, there were, but it also there was an attitude in the relationship, and it was a very me attitude. It was whatever was best for her, whatever was best for what she got out of the marriage. I was the one that was made to be responsible for everything in the marriage. So while she sat back and benefited from everything, but also it came down to how I was being treated. So many times she espoused these traditional values. Yes, I want you to be
and she'd tell you need to be more manly.
Yeah, well, later, yeah, but yeah. I mean, but the point was for her, it was, you need to. I want you to be the father. I want you to be the man of the house. I want this. I want that. But when it came time to me saying, "Hey, I really think that we need to be doing this," her response was, "Don't tell me what to do."
Right.
And
so there's no give and take.
And to me, it was never an ultimatum thing. I never said, "Hey, you have to do this or else." So just to give you an example,
Right.
she was married before, and she also had some ex-boyfriends who she remained in contact with. Now, her ex-husband, her first husband, and her ex-boyfriends all had the expectation that they were going to get back together with her. Even while she was married to me, the expectation was that they expected that they were going to get back together with her. So they would communicate with her often. She would communicate with them. She would lead them on in so much that she didn't come out and, she didn't say, "Hey, maybe someday."
Right.
Her thing,
but the implications
was
there just by staying in contact with them.
Just by staying in contact. And finally I said,
keeping the backup in place.
Yes. And so what I said to her was, look, it's not healthy. It's not healthy to lead them on like this. We are married, and it's not a good idea to carry on that relationship. It's probably considered inappropriate because they're expecting to get together with you, but we're committed to each other. At least we're supposed to be. That's literally how I responded. And I said, it'd be a good idea if you stopped. I never gave her the
Right.
ultimatum. I never said, hey, you must or else, or I'm going to leave you, or if you don't do this, you don't love me. I never manipulated her in that way. And she wouldn't do that. And within a week of us actually separating, she was back with one of her former boyfriends again. And it was always this thing where she had to keep this in the background. She had to keep that fire going, even if it didn't appear like the fire was going. And it really put a strain on our relationship. And it's partially why I made the decision that I did, that, hey, this is just not going to work.
Right.
So,
Well, and it goes back to what
not
we
to
were
mention
talking
the
about,
abuse.
where
So,
it has to be a give and take, right? It's 100% situation where when
yeah,
you're in a supposedly committed relationship,
the effort,
commitment,
yes.
that you are both committing 100%, you're both giving, and it's not a and so there is a trait, that is, most of the traits that make a man are also the same traits that make a woman. Like there is an important level of just being good that is the key feature that we should all be seeking, male or female. And when you talk about what makes a man, then you're talking about being good. Ultimately, you're talking about those core features, and so that applies to womanhood too. And so it goes back to that idea of roles, where
Yeah, it's not just a
what
male
is your
role.
role?
Well, it's just, I mean, good grief, it's probably just what is it? What is it to be an adult, maybe,
Sure.
and what it takes to be an adult, and somebody who is successful in relationships, whether they are friendships, whether they're relationships with your siblings, with your parents, with your children. It just means being an adult, and humility is probably one of the biggest ones, biggest traits that you can have. It was even when I raised my son 50-50 in my post-marriage relationship with my ex-wife. There was still an awful lot that my son ended up not having. So yes, he had both parents equally in his life,
Right.
and
Divorce is hard
but
always.
it definitely was. But it is really astounding, the change that has come about in the last 5 years since I got full custody, and that change has really been he's been able to sit back and now see the lifestyle choices that his mom made and how it affected him. Not only how it affected him emotionally and mentally, but how it affected him physically. So the lifestyle choices that she was making affected him physically because of the substances that she was taking.
Correct. Yeah.
And he was pretty naive to it, but it wasn't until I found out, and I did absolutely everything to make sure that he would be taken away from that,
Protected.
and it worked. I mean, he was protected in that way, and boy, what kind of a father would I be if I just would have let it happen? He said so many situations.
What kind of a mother or father exposes their children to things that are dangerous to them for their own personal pleasure? And I think that's something that happens a lot.
For selfishness reasons.
It's like, you just think of basically like smoking cigarettes and stuff. You're in your home smoking cigarettes with kids and exposing your kids to secondhand smoke. That is not a manly or womanly thing to do. That is not the selfless choice.
Years ago, I knew a gal who smoked while pregnant, and her firstborn had asthma, and it's such a bad situation. Now she ended up having 2 more children, and she refused to smoke while pregnant, thank goodness. But there were also other lifestyle choices where her children was taking away from her because of the same reasons why my ex-wife's lost custody of
Right.
partial custody of our son. And so, but again, it goes back to what kind of a man would I have been if I would have just continued to let it happen because I felt, hey, but my son needs his mom in his life. Look, that was a very toxic relationship. He had counselors telling him it was a toxic relationship. His sister went through the same things. Her family members all experienced the same toxicity from her. So this is a really bad situation. And I have gone through years. I mean, we're close to 17 years now of absolute hell, 16 years of, no, it's 17 years of hell because of the fact that I decided to leave it. I decided to leave that toxicity. And also, raising my son was never an option. Absolutely never an option. I knew that I was going to raise my son.
You meant to say not raising your son. I think you missed that word.
I'm sorry. Yes,
not raising your son was never an option. Double negative. You meant to double negative it. But raising your son was always going to be.
It was never going to be an option, and I can't imagine. If I can't even imagine having my life without him. It is the best, greatest sacrifice I have ever made. Not just the abuse that continues even to this day, just this week it continues. But and I'm talking about from his mom, but it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. I would do it all over again if I had to.
You've talked about before how a lot of men or women will, because of whatever situation, they will give up on that situation. They'll walk away from it. They'll walk away from their children because it's so much hassle. And instead of fighting the good fight, and that's one of the things that I think definitely comes into play of what it means to be a man, is you never give up. You always fight the good fight. When it's good and it's right, you fight and you fight. And whatever that sacrifice means, that you stick to it and you make that sacrifice because you're not living, what you said specifically, you're not living for yourself anymore.
You're not living for yourself anymore. You're as soon as your child is born, as soon as you decide to have a child, or as soon as you conceive a child, your life has changed. It's not just the mother's life that has changed, it's the father's life that has changed. And too many times, especially in society today, there are so many fathers who just give up. They just
treat
leave.
It like their life shouldn't have changed, or they don't want their life to change. They don't take the responsibility.
And there are mothers that do that too. Yeah. There are mothers that do that as well. And I've seen mothers that do that, mothers that have teenage children, several teenage children, and they live their lives for themselves. They go through marriage after marriage after marriage because they want self-fulfillment without realizing that what their children needed the most was them. Yeah. And it is really angering to me when I see stories and I hear of people and I speak to people who say it just wasn't worth it. It just wasn't worth the time. It just wasn't worth the heartache.
Don't misunderstand us. When we talk about that, we're not suggesting that, like, if you're a woman and you're in an abusive marriage, that you need to stick it out for the sake of your children or something. That's not the implication.
But for the sake of your children, you get out of that.
Yeah,
and
exactly. You do what's right for your children,
yes.
And getting out of an abusive relationship is what exactly. Yeah.
But if you're in a situation that was similar to mine, you get out of that relationship because it is damaging to you. It's going to affect how you parent. And I never felt like I had the option to walk away. I never felt like I had the option to not pay my child support. And I never felt like I had the option to not provide health insurance or dental insurance or anything like that. I always made sure that those things were...
That's your responsibility.
My responsibility,
I do have a slight double standard on, when it comes to abuse, because there's a line, like, you can call simple things abuse because they're abusive in nature, but they're, just like being yelled at or whatever. And then you can go all the way to actual physical or sexual abuse that is, the far end of that. I do kind of have a little bit of a double standard on that, where that line goes from gray to crossed for men and women. I have a very strong opinion that women have more of a right to not accept abuse of any nature from their husbands. Once again, there's still gray, right? Like, if the husband is just, watches football too much or something, that's different, right? You could theoretically call something like that abusive, right? Because he's spending too much time.
Neglect.
You can call neglect abuse, right? You can blur the line a little bit. But women, when their husband are actually abusive to them in ways that men should stand up and take, women should get out, and so I kind of have a little bit of a different standard there, and that's because as a man, I feel protective of women, and in a way that I feel men have a responsibility to stand up and be protective and to put up with things that aren't, necessarily ideal to an extent, whereas women have the responsibility to, they're the to not put too fine a term on it, or to put a fine term on it, the gentle sex, right? And they should be treated that way, and they should protect themselves that way as well. I don't have any tolerance for abuse
Okay,
of women.
so what kind of abuse should a man be able to take?
Well, like for example,
Is it okay for a woman to hit a man?
no, absolutely not. But no, what I'm talking about is so like I know situations where
Is it okay for a woman to talk down to a man?
well, it's not okay, of course. But if a woman is talking down to her husband, sometimes is it okay for him to divorce her?
All the time?
Right. Well, all the time, yeah, exactly. That's where the gray line. That's where the line comes into play. I don't believe in answering the concrete question. I think that's a personal decision. But you might take an example of like, say, spending, right? Whereas the wife, if a wife is spending irresponsibly, and the husband's feeling like it's keeping them from getting ahead financially or whatever, for the husband to leave his wife over that is a little different than if the husband is spending financially and the wife is stuck in a financial dire straits, especially if she's not bringing in income as well. If she's being the homemaker and staying at home, and then the husband is not being responsible with her money, that's a different situation where the wife has a right to the husband being responsible with his money, that the husband can still expect that and can still absolutely, fight the good fight and talk to the wife and should expect results and everything. But for him to walk away over that is a little different than the woman to walk away because of the same sort of situation.
But I think also, and that goes back to, really, are you devoted to each other? Are you devoted to making sure that the relationship works and that you are treating each other incredibly respectfully, and that should go both ways. A woman who devotes herself to her husband and a husband who devotes himself to his wife, they won't have those abuses in the relationship. They won't abuse money that the other earns. They won't abuse what things the other person brings to the relationship.
But there's even a difference in, for example, and I'm not saying either way is right, of course, but if a woman is, sometimes getting angry and, yelling, shouting, and I'm not saying at her husband even necessarily, just like, in the house, there's a woman who's getting mad sometimes. There's a difference between that and a man getting angry and shouting. And the reason why is because a man is stronger, louder, and more violent. If a man is saying "Roar," it's different.
More prone to violence, not violent, more prone to violence.
It's scarier. It's scarier for a woman to have a man yelling than it is for a woman to have
there have been times
the other way
where
around.
So I actually kind of agree with that, because there have been times when I've been very angry with my son. The last thing in the world on my mind was that I was going to physically hurt him.
Yeah.
And yet he would
scare him. Yeah.
Hold on.
I went in.
But yet.
Well,
just
I have
a
an
minute,
example.
Just a second.
Okay.
But he would look at me, and I saw the look on his face, and I said, "Bud, do you think I'm going to hurt you?" And he said, "I'm kind of scared right now. Yes." And I said, and I had to. It calmed me down immediately. But I did look at him, and I said, "Son, son, I would never do that." And I never have. So that's something we talked about it the other day. Was I said something jokingly to him. I said something like, "Boy, you do that and you're gonna get a beat down. You're gonna get a smack down, or I'm gonna throw down, or something like, just in a fun, joking way."
Right.
And he knew I was joking, and then he quipped back and he goes, "I thought you said you'd never hit me."
Good on him, yeah.
And it was awesome. But he's exactly right though. And that he said I thought you didn't believe in hitting. We were in the drive-through at Chick-fil-A. So.
Last night, my kids were in the bedroom with me. They like to go in and kind of turn on a little bit of a show at night, and so I had gone upstairs for a second to help my wife, and I had told the kids they were pulling pillows off the bed, and my wife gets frustrated because they pull our pillows off the bed and make a total mess of them, and then she has to come back in and make the bed. So I said, just before I walked out, I said, don't pull the pillows off the bed. And then I walked out, came down literally like 30 seconds later, every single pillow and the blanket, the beds were all on the floor and stuff. Mm-hmm. And just because I was in a mood or something and stuff, And my daughter immediately, ratted out my son and said, "You did it. He did it." and I immediately was like, "Boy!" I didn't call him boy, of course. I called him by his name, but I'm, keep his name out of public, right? So I'm like, I'm like, boy, and just
Yeah.
barked at him, and really quite loudly and stuff. And he, of course, started crying immediately. And my immediate
Yeah.
response was, "Good, I taught you a lesson by making you cry." And then, of course,
No, you just made him afraid of you.
within another 30 seconds or so, I was like, I shouldn't have done that and stuff. And so, of course, I apologized. I picked him up. I told him, I'm really sorry. I yelled, boy. Once again, didn't call him boy, but and then I apologized to my daughter, and then I apologized to my wife, because my wife's upstairs hearing me go, at my son. And so I went and apologized to everyone and committed to try to do better and to not do that sort of thing. But every once in a while, right? Everybody loses their temper once in a while and snaps in a way that they didn't mean to. But I do think that there's a difference when a man does that and when a woman does it. They're both
that's
bad.
because it's scary.
Obviously,
it's
the woman,
scary.
the woman shouldn't be doing it either. It sets a bad example for the children. Yelling's just generally not conducive to anything, unless they're going to run in front of a truck or something. If it's a safety issue, right? But yeah, there's a difference, because the man is just when I yell, I know I'm scary. It's scary when I lose my temper, because I'm bigger than everybody in the house. And so there is a difference there, and that's an interesting difference.
Even with so my son is now a little bit taller than I am, but there is the intimidation of age, experience. Of course, because you're an adult and you're, especially if you're a father figure, you command a certain amount of respect, and there's kind of a built-in fear. And it shouldn't be, if I do this, my father is going to be really angry with me and he's going to hurt me. The fear should be, if I do this, my father is going to be angry and he's going to be very disappointed in me.
Yeah, disappointment is a
that's very, very powerful. And actually, it goes back to a little bit of something that I heard. It was actually Brad Pitt who said this, that his father never yelled at them, but he said that they always were very disciplined, because he said that if they would ever do anything to disappoint their father, there was a look that he would give them, and that look caused them to just feel horrible,
right.
like they never wanted to.
The reason why that worked, and the reason why it made him feel horrible, disappointment cannot work as discipline without respect. I had one of my best friend growing up. That's the way his parents disciplined him, is just through disappointment, and he didn't respect his parents, and it didn't work. And he knew that. He'd talk about it. He'd say, they think it's going to work that they're disappointed in me, but I don't care, And so, of course, he was a kid then. He's grown up now. He's actually a great guy, but anyway, so we're running out of time here. I did want to end on this final concept, because one of the thoughts I had when you were talking about, as we've had these conversations, you've been talking about sacrifice, and I thought, who is a better role model of what a man should be than our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? He set the example of manliness and courage and honor and respect and honesty. And one of the key characteristics of Jesus is that idea of sacrifice, of sacrificing himself, not only for his loved ones that were immediately close to him, but for everyone. He sacrificed for the entirety of mankind. And what a great example of what being a man is, to give his life for ours, for the sake of love. And so I think we couldn't do better than, being willing to sacrifice for others. That is a great characteristic that I believe is key to being a man, to what is a man. Of course, it's also key to being what is a woman. And women women sacrifice themselves in childbirth, right? They just, in that alone, they sacrifice themselves. But that is a great example that our Savior set for us all.
Yeah, and I don't think it obviously doesn't come with the requirement that we all literally sacrifice
literally
ourselves,
lay down our lives in every situation, sure.
But in the sacrifice also is that you devote your life now to other people. You devote your life when you're in a situation like we are. We're fathers. We were both husbands. You're still a husband. We have a responsibility that is now beyond ourselves, and we should devote our time to ensure that the safety of those that we
they come
protect,
first.
yes, that it comes first, and not our own selfish desires. Of course, that doesn't mean that we can't have joy in our own things. It's okay to go do things with friends if that's what we're going to do.
Unless it's hurting others, right? If you're hurting your wife,
but if it's abusive, in other words, we abuse it so much that we're not spending that time with those that we care about and those that depend on us.
Like we joke about manly things like football, right? And football, obviously, football's fine and stuff. But if your wife is hurt by the fact that you're watching football and that she feels loss at that somehow and stuff, then a man would step up.
It is exactly why Tom Brady's life is divorcing him right now.
Right. Which I watched on the 5 on Fox News that they were debating about that and arguing about that.
Yeah,
and on Gut
he's
Field
married
as well.
to football.
Gutfeld.
He's married to football.
It's funny the different points of view that they take on whose side they're on and stuff. But no, a man would step up and put his wife first. And I'm actually not on Tom Brady's side in this case.
And the women were on her side.
Yeah. But I'm actually not on Tom Brady's side in this case.
Well,
of course, we don't know the whole story.
I'm not on either one of their sides.
Yeah, neither am I. Because who knows, right?
I'm not in either. Well, I'm against both of them because they are both not devoted to each other.
And they're both making selfish choices, yeah.
Yeah, they are. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So I think being a man, be
a man, Tom Brady.
That's right. Be a man. What's her name?
Be a whoa man.
Be a whoa man.
Tom Brady's wife.
Tom Brady's wife, that I don't remember her name right now because I don't care. So anyway.
I think I've heard it once. Yeah.
So I think that's a good summary of what it means to be a man. I mean, Christ is the exemplar. Sacrifice, humility. We talked about pride a little bit and humility. Humbling yourself, being willing to sacrifice and give your life for others. So on that note, I think we'll end here. So we appreciate your time, and feel free to subscribe, dislike, comment, interaction. We'll try and interact with you. If you leave a comment, if it's a hateful, terrible comment, we'll probably just delete it. Only if it's got foul language, right?
If it's meant to tear down, then we're
feel free to tell us that you disagree with us, though, and that
civil debate. We like civil debate. Yeah.
But we'd love it if you'd interact and tell us what you think, what it is that makes a man, and especially in today's world where masculinity has been so attacked and called toxic in so many ways. So.
Because we're men.
Yeah. So, thank you. See you next time.